They dragged him off the plane without a word of apology. He didn't shout. He didn't resist. He just looked at them and said, "They just made the worst decision of their careers." You ever witness a moment so wrong, you knew it couldn't just end there? Stick with this one. You're going to want to hear how it ends. It started on an ordinary morning at Denver International. The kind of morning where no one makes eye contact, and the gate agents smile only with their mouths. Julian Cross stood at gate 42B, passport in hand, carry-on slung over one shoulder. Dark navy jacket, gray shirt, neat, understated. He blended in like he always did. "Mr. Cross," the agent called. He stepped forward. "We've upgraded you to first class, seat 1A. Thank you for being one of our loyal travelers." Julian nodded politely. "Appreciate it." No big reaction, no boast, just a quiet man who happened to fly a lot. As boarding began, he moved toward the gate and paused, just for a moment, to help an elderly woman struggling with her roller bag. The wheels had caught in the cheap carpet like they always do. "May I?" he offered, gently freeing it. "Oh, thank you, young man," she said, her voice full of relief. "This thing's got a mind of its own." He smiled. "They usually do." She gave his arm a quick pat. "My grandson could learn a thing or two from you." He nodded, helped her roll the bag a few steps, then returned to the line. Behind him, someone was watching. First-class boarding. Julian found his seat, 1A by the window. He stowed his carry-on, sat down quietly, and pulled out his phone. No fuss, no swagger. Moments later, a man in a sharp navy suit with silver cufflinks stopped beside his row. He didn't speak at first, just looked down at Julian as if trying to solve a puzzle that didn't quite fit. His wife appeared next to him. Blonde, pearl necklace, tightly controlled smile. "I believe you're in our row," the man said. Julian glanced up. "I'm in 1A. We're 1B and 1C, the woman chimed in. "Carl and Denise Whitmore." Julian offered a polite nod. "Julian Cross." Carl didn't return the courtesy, just gestured with a sigh, and Julian stood to let them through. Denise clutched her handbag tightly as she slid into 1C. Didn't tuck it under the seat, kept it right in her lap. A few minutes passed. The flight attendants moved through the cabin offering drinks. When they reached their row, the Whitmores were served first. Julian had to remind them that he too had ordered water. The attendant, name tag, Miranda, handed it to him last, avoiding eye contact. Then she lingered. "I'm sorry, sir. Could I see your boarding pass again?" Julian looked at her, puzzled but calm. "Is there a problem?" "Just a quick verification," she said with a clipped tone. He retrieved his phone and showed the digital pass. She glanced at it longer than necessary, checked his ID again. "Thank you," she said, moving on. But Julian noticed something. She hadn't checked Carl's, or Denise's, or anyone else's in first class. He took a breath, said nothing. Just as he settled back in, Miranda returned again. "I need to ask you to step off the plane, sir." Julian turned slowly. "I'm sorry? We've had a report of aggressive behavior. Please comply so we can avoid further delay." The entire cabin stilled. Julian didn't raise his voice. "I haven't spoken to anyone but the flight attendant and the passengers beside me." "That's enough," Miranda snapped. "Please stand up." Carl leaned slightly into the aisle. "He's been making us feel uncomfortable since we sat down," he said, voice just loud enough for nearby rows to hear. Denise added quietly, "There's just a tone." Security arrived within seconds. Two men, stern-faced, ready. They didn't ask questions, they didn't offer an explanation. "Sir, you need to come with us," one said. Julian stood slowly, adjusted his jacket, picked up his bag. As he stepped into the aisle, the guard's hand landed on his arm, firm, unnecessary. The cabin watched in silence. Phones out, eyes turned away. Not one person said a word. He was almost at the door when he stopped, turned just slightly, looked over his shoulder, and with the same calm he'd carried from the beginning, he said they just made the most expensive mistake of their lives. "Now let me show you why. Because this isn't just a story about a man being removed from a plane. It's about what happens when power doesn't come with noise, but with leverage." The car door shut with a soft click. Julian Cross sat in the back seat, staring straight ahead through tinted glass. No anger in his eyes, no panic, just calculation. He pulled out his phone and dialed. The voice on the other end didn't even finish saying hello before Julian spoke. "Pull the investment, all of it, today." A pause. "Yes, I'm certain, I'll explain later." He ended the call and leaned back in the seat. A deep breath. Not of exhaustion, but of finality. Downtown Manhattan, Cross-Stratagem Holdings, an unmarked building of stone and steel. Inside, the atmosphere was quiet, efficient, almost monk-like. On the top floor, in an office lined with floor-to-ceiling windows, a small team was already moving. Secure servers lit up, transaction logs began shifting. Julian's name wasn't on the door. It never had been. But he was the architect of the entire empire. He'd built his wealth behind the curtain, quietly acquiring critical infrastructure across aviation, logistics, and communications. Not to be flashy, but to be untouchable. And today, for the first time in years, he decided to stop being quiet. He stood by the window for a moment, watching the city move. Then, his mind drifted back to a chalkboard in a Detroit public school. He was 7. A math problem stretched across the board. Fractions, ratios, 3 grade levels above what they were supposed to learn. And Julian, with his skinny frame and too big backpack, had finished the answer before the teacher even handed out pencils. She didn't smile, didn't praise him. Instead, she looked at him and said, "Julian, this might make some of the other kids uncomfortable." He didn't understand, until he did. That day he was told to sit out the next few exercises, because no one wanted a show-off. You're too quick, too sharp, it's not always a good thing. But what she meant was, too dangerous for someone who looks like you. Another memory surfaced. College. He had just graduated MIT, double major honors internships references. He applied to Altura Airlines for a summer engineering internship, filled out every form, wrote a cover letter so carefully worded it could have been poetry. Waited and waited. He never heard back. Years later, while reviewing a public acquisition file, he stumbled upon an old internal rejection note. Printed, scanned, archived, and signed by Reginald Bancroft himself. Scrawled in the margin, "Background doesn't fit our culture. Reject." Julian had stared at that note for a long time. Not because it hurt, but because it proved something he'd always known. It was never about the resume. Back in the present, Julian poured a glass of water from the minimalist bar in his office. His reflection in the window stared back, older, sharper, but still holding the same steady eyes. They dragged the wrong man off that plane. Not because he was powerful, but because they still thought people like him should sit in the back, smile politely, and say thank you for the crumbs. And now they were going to remember his name. The next morning, in a glass tower above Midtown Manhattan, 3 words echoed through the boardroom of Altura Airlines. He pulled everything. Silence. Then Reginald Bancroft, CEO of the 3rd largest airline in the country, leaned back in his chair, trying and failing to mask the sudden tightness in his jaw. "Everything?" he repeated. The CFO swallowed hard. "Yes, sir. All 4 billion. Gone. As of 7:48 a.m. Eastern." Reginald's knuckles tapped the table. His expression remained calm, but his eyes flicked toward the monitor displaying live financial feeds. Altura's market stability was slipping, and no one in the room knew who had the power to pull that kind of money. Meanwhile, across the city, in the server room of a company few people had ever heard of, Cross-Stratagem Holdings, dozens of high-level engineers were quietly executing a coordinated extraction from Altura's operational grid. Flight planning, maintenance diagnostics, routing logic, all powered by a single proprietary AI platform, Novatech. And the man behind that platform was Julian Cross. For years, Altura and more than half of America's commercial airlines had been running on his invisible architecture. They didn't know it, because he'd made sure they didn't. Julian wasn't interested in headlines. He didn't need a press release to validate his position. He built systems, not empires. Until now. Now, he was ready to use everything he had built to show what real leverage looked like. He sat at a sleek black desk, coffee untouched beside him. Marlon Cho, his longtime advisor, stood by the window with a tablet in hand. "They're scrambling," Marlon said. "They don't know it's you yet." Julian nodded slowly. "They will." Back at Altura headquarters, a woman in a steel gray pantsuit walked briskly into the boardroom. Kendra Vale, chief of PR. Her heels didn't click. They struck. Every step punctuated with purpose. Reginald didn't wait for pleasantries. "Kendra, we're bleeding." His voice was flat, but the twitch in his temple betrayed the pressure. "I'm aware," she said calmly, sliding into a chair. She opened her laptop, already typing. "Social media chatter is growing. Hashtags about the man on the plane. The clip of him being removed has over 3 million views." Reginald scoffed. Another viral tantrum. We've weathered worse. Not like this, Kendra replied, eyes locked on the screen. Whoever he is, he didn't scream. He didn't shout. He just left and made the market move. Reginald stood, pacing now. He looked familiar, he muttered. I swear I've seen his face before. Kendra tilted her head slightly. Whoever he is, sir, he's smart, strategic, and extremely well connected. Reginald turned to face her. Find out everything. Fast. Kendra nodded once, closing her laptop with a snap, then paused before leaving. There's one more thing, she added. Novatech is flagging limited API access across our systems. Some modules are already locking down. If we lose full access, we lose flight management within 48 hours. Reginald blinked. Call their tech support. She raised an eyebrow. Novatech doesn't have a public support line. Their contracts are managed quietly. A beat of silence. Reginald finally sat down, eyes narrowing. Something was beginning to click. Somewhere, buried in the back of his memory, a name, a resume, a rejection form. But he didn't say it yet. Back at Cross Stratagem, Marlon turned from the window. So what now? Julian stood, buttoned his jacket, and looked out over the city. Now? He said quietly. Now I let them figure out who they kicked off their plane. The video didn't have a title, just a shaky shot of a man being escorted off a plane. No yelling, no aggression, just quiet and shame. And then one voice broke the silence. I should have said something. Alina Reyes sat in her living room, wearing no makeup, her uniform jacket folded beside her on the couch. A glass of water sat untouched on the coffee table. Her hands trembled slightly, but her voice was steady. I was there, on Flight 227. I saw what happened to Mr. Cross. She paused, blinking fast. I didn't speak up. I told myself it wasn't my place. But silence is a choice, and I chose wrong. Her eyes lifted to the camera. I don't know who he is, but I know what I saw, and I know he didn't deserve what we did to him. By mid-morning, Alina's video had been shared over 200,000 times. And it was just the beginning. A few hours later, a different clip began making the rounds. This one shot from row 6, angled just enough to catch Julian being led down the aisle. It was posted by Dr. Maya Ellis, a black journalist and frequent flyer who had been quietly working on a documentary about race and travel. Her caption was short, flying while black, again, never subtle, never accidental. Within minutes, the hashtag flying while black began trending. Not just in the US, globally. Stories poured in, photos, boarding pass screenshots, posts describing humiliating seat reassignments, extra baggage checks, and subtle, relentless dismissals. One by one, the quiet ones began to speak. And then, a voice no one expected. Martha Wilson, 74 years old, retired librarian from Salt Lake City. She had been sitting just 2 rows behind Julian when he helped her lift her stuck roller bag. In a video filmed by her granddaughter, Martha spoke slowly, deliberately. I didn't know his name that day, but I remember how kind he was. He helped me, didn't even hesitate, and then they pulled him out of his seat, like he didn't belong there. Her eyes welled with tears. I didn't say a word. I just watched it happen, and I've regretted that every minute since. That night, a news anchor read Martha's words aloud on national television. By morning, a wave had started. Not a scream, not a riot, a quiet reckoning. People who'd never thought they had a story realized they did. They'd been pushed to the back, ignored in the front, flagged, questioned, dismissed. Not because they did anything wrong, but because they looked like someone who might. And at the center of it all was a man who still hadn't said a word publicly. Julian Cross's name began to circulate, but only in whispers. He hadn't done interviews, hadn't released a statement. But somehow, his silence was louder than any press conference. The folder sat between them like a live wire. No one touched it for a long moment. Julian Cross looked across the cafe table at Green, former compliance supervisor at Altura Airlines, and one of the few people who had ever tried to fight the system from the inside. Her eyes were cautious, not afraid, but tired. You sure you want to see what's in there? She asked quietly. Julian didn't blink. I've seen worse. Amari gave a short, humorless laugh. Maybe, but this isn't just negligence. It's built in. She slid the folder toward him. Inside, printouts of internal emails, training slide decks, incident logs with patterns no one had wanted to acknowledge, color-coded notes, highlighted names, language that had clearly passed through legal, but not through conscience. One slide read, Be alert for passengers whose appearance does not match their seat class. Another, urban speech patterns may signal high-risk behavior. Avoid escalation. Notify supervisor discreetly. And then, Julian turned a page and stopped. A handwritten annotation, scrawled in black ink at the corner of a printed document. Be cautious of overly confident black passengers in premium cabins. No signature, just a date. But it was recent. He stared at the words like they were a slow-burning fire. Amari sat back, arms folded. They said I was too sensitive, that I was seeing racism where there was none. Then they reassigned me. Then they fired me. Julian closed the folder gently. How did you get out with these? She met his gaze. You work compliance long enough, you learn what not to delete. Later that night, in his office overlooking Manhattan, Julian stood at the window as the lights of the city blinked around him. Behind him, the folder lay open, its contents scanned, encrypted, preserved. Marlon entered, tablet in hand. We can go public. File suit. Hit them hard, fast, and clean. Julian didn't turn around. No. Marlon paused. Why not? We have enough to destroy them. I'm not here to destroy one company, Julian said. I'm here to expose a system. He finally turned, face calm but resolved. If we sue, it's another news cycle. If we speak in the halls where laws are written, they can't bury it. 2 weeks later, a name appeared on the witness list for the Senate Subcommittee on Transportation Oversight. Julian Cross, CEO, Cross Stratagem Holdings, subject, Systemic Discrimination in Commercial Aviation. The hearing hadn't even started, but the cameras were already rolling. The media was calling it the flight that sparked a firestorm. Inside the chamber, Julian sat alone at the long wooden table. No legal team, no entourage, just one man, and the truth. In his briefcase was everything they'd tried to bury, and in his voice was everything they feared would be heard. There was no judge, no jury, no gavel slamming in righteous fury. But make no mistake, this was a trial, and every camera in the room was watching. Julian Cross sat alone at the witness table, a single folder resting in front of him, his name on the screen behind. Julian Cross, CEO, Cross Stratagem Holdings. To his left, a long semicircle of senators, some curious, some skeptical, a few already defensive. The chair gavelled in the session. Mr. Cross, you may begin. He stood, adjusted the microphone, and spoke without reading a word. Thank you, senators. I'm here today not as a businessman, but as a black man who was removed from a plane for the crime of sitting where I paid to sit. Silence. Not a breath in the chamber. But this isn't just about me. This is about every person who's ever been told, you don't belong here. He paused. Let the weight of it settle. I was calm. I followed every rule. I was escorted off that flight, not because of what I did, but because of what I represented. He opened the folder, held up a printed slide. Altura Airlines training document, instructing gate agents to flag passengers with urban speech patterns for additional scrutiny. Another paper. Internal email thread advising caution around overly confident black passengers in premium cabins. Murmurs stirred in the room. On screen, the camera zoomed in as Julian laid the documents out one by one. These aren't accidents. This isn't miscommunication. This is culture, and it's costing lives, dignity, opportunity, every day. Then came the numbers. Since 2013, Altura has settled 8 discrimination cases quietly, each with NDAs. Not one of those settlements resulted in a policy change. One senator leaned forward, clearly uncomfortable. Mr. Cross, some may say you're using this hearing to harm a company's reputation for personal reasons. Would you care to respond? Julian nodded once, then pressed a button on his tablet. A document appeared on the overhead screen, a financial disclosure form. That company contributes millions each year to groups that lobby against DEI regulations, groups that openly oppose equal access policies in aviation, hiring, and public services. The screen shifted. Another page, a list of those lobbying groups. Another, the senator's name among their top individual campaign beneficiaries. The room fell completely silent. Julian didn't raise his voice, didn't gloat. He just closed the folder and looked out across the chamber. This hearing is not about revenge. I'm not here to be a victim. I'm here because the system depends on silence to keep its balance, and I refuse to be silent anymore. He stepped back, sat down, and let the silence speak for him. A few moments later, a female senator near the end of the row, gray-haired, dignified, whispered something to her aide, then quietly wiped a tear from her cheek. On the live stream, thousands of viewers flooded the comments with a single phrase. "We see you, Mr. Cross. We hear you." Julian didn't smile. He didn't need to. Because this wasn't the end. It was the start of something that could no longer be ignored. It started with a headline. Altura Flight 638 drops altitude mid-air. Sources blame pulled safety system. Then came the push notifications. Julian Cross's tech move may have put hundreds at risk. And within an hour, every major network was broadcasting the same question. Did one man's vendetta endanger innocent lives? Julian stood in his office, the television screen split into panels, anchors debating, analysts speculating, and former pilots shaking their heads solemnly. One even called him reckless with power. Another, a billionaire playing God with passenger safety. Marlon burst through the door, tablet in hand. "They're twisting it. Hard. They're saying we cut them off already, that our system failed." Julian didn't look up. He simply said, "Show me the data." What they didn't know, what Altura hoped no one would ever find out, was this. The AI system Julian built hadn't been deactivated. He'd honored every contract. The revocation window still had 22 hours left. And more importantly, it was his software that corrected the error. Flight 638's drop in altitude? It was pilot error. It was Novatech's predictive algorithm that kicked in, recalculated the pressure variance, stabilized the jet, saved every life on board. Marlon zoomed in on the flight log. "It's right here. The AI override was triggered at 7:6:21. If we'd pulled the system already, that plane would have gone down." Julian took a breath. "They wanted to frame me as the villain. Fine. Let's show them who the real protectors are." The next day, Julian Cross appeared on live television for the first time since the incident began. The studio was quiet. No dramatic music, no grand entrance. Just a single chair, a man in gray, and the truth. The host began, "Mr. Cross, did your decision to withdraw services put lives at risk?" Julian looked directly into the camera. "No, I never endangered lives. I protected them, even when they tried to erase mine." He paused, then continued. "I didn't pull the system early. I respected every agreement, and the very software they claimed I weaponized saved that plane." As the clip aired, social media lit up. "Julian saved 638 hashed, facts not fear, he protected us." The narrative began to shift, and for the first time since it all began, Julian Cross was not just a voice of justice. He was proof that integrity still mattered. It didn't start with a press release, or a viral video, or even a leak. It started with a name. Equair. Short, simple, but it meant everything. The announcement went live at 7 a.m. sharp. Just one page. No bragging, no vengeance, just a headline. Introducing Equair, where everyone deserves a seat. And beneath it, a single quote from Julian Cross. "We're not here to replace the old. We're here to build what should have always existed." The world took notice, not just because of the name behind it, but because of how he was doing it. Transparent hiring policies, anonymous resume review, a technology stack that actively detected and flagged biased decision-making. No legacy systems, no outdated culture. Every detail of Equair was designed for dignity. Alina Reyes, once the quiet flight attendant who sat in shame, was now head of passenger experience. Her first initiative? A program called Voices from the Aisle, where former flight crew across all airlines could anonymously share the biases they had seen and lived through. Amari Green, once fired for doing the right thing, now stood proudly as Chief Compliance and Equity Officer. She built a new protocol from scratch, one that didn't just react to discrimination, but prevented it. In real time, with oversight, with teeth. The launch video dropped just 3 days after the announcement. A slow pan across a runway at dawn, a new aircraft gliding across golden morning light. Voices of real passengers layered in. I remember being told I didn't look like I belonged. I paid for the seat, but I still felt like a threat. I just wanted to fly home without fear. And then, a single sentence appeared on screen. Everyone deserves a seat, no exceptions. By the end of the first week, the pre-registration list had crossed 1 million. Not because the flights were cheaper, not because the logo was beautiful, but because for once, people felt seen. And that feeling was worth more than first class. The terminal gleamed in the morning sun. Glass, steel, and light. Clean, quiet, efficient. But what made it beautiful was the people. A family moved through Gate 7. A mother, a daughter. The little girl clutched a boarding pass in one hand and a juice box in the other. She looked no older than 7. Bright eyes, braids tied with sky blue beads. They reached their row. She looked up, paused, and pointed toward the front of the plane. "Mom, the pilot looks like me." At the cockpit door, a woman in full captain's uniform gave a quick wave and a warm nod. Asian American. Confident, calm. The little girl beamed. "I didn't know girls could fly planes too." Her mother smiled and whispered, "They always could, but now they finally get to." A few rows back, in an inconspicuous seat, a man in a gray baseball cap watched quietly. Julian Cross, older now, lines a little deeper, eyes still sharp. No one recognized him. He preferred it that way. He sipped his coffee and watched as passengers boarded. Black, white, brown, hijabs, locks, turbans, tattoos, families, solo travelers, flight attendants of every background greeting them with ease. No tension, no double takes, just people, flying. As the boarding process continued, Julian's gaze drifted, out the window, back in time, to the moment he was pulled out of seat 1A, the walk of shame, the silence of the cabin, the sting of knowing no one had stood up. Now, he saw children giggling in row 9, an elderly couple holding hands in row 18, a wheelchair being guided gently down the jet bridge, and in row 12, a little girl still beaming, her seatbelt now buckled tight, her eyes on the cockpit door. He turned back, just as the plane began to taxi. A soft voice from the intercom. "Welcome aboard, Equair. We're proud to fly you today, and proud of who we are, because of who you are." Julian leaned back, eyes closed, heart full. This wasn't about revenge. It never was. It was about this. This moment. This girl. This legacy. His voice came low, just above a whisper. Not to anyone in particular, but to himself. To the sky. "They dragged me out of a seat I paid for, so I built a new plane, and I made sure it had room for everyone they tried to keep out." And as the plane lifted into the clouds, so did everything he ever believed was possible. Because justice doesn't always wear a robe. Sometimes it wears a pilot's wings. If this story moved you, if it made you pause, reflect, or see the world a little differently, we hope you'll take a moment to let us know. Because this wasn't just about one man or one flight. It was about dignity, about belonging, and about the kind of future we choose to build together. If you believe that everyone deserves a seat, no matter where they're from or what they look like this video, share it with someone who needs to hear it. And don't forget to subscribe to Mr. Mac's Stories for more powerful tales that speak truth to power. Your support means more than you know. It gives our team the strength to keep creating stories that challenge, inspire, and shine a light where it's needed most. Thanks for being here. Thanks for listening. And above all, thank you for believing in stories that matter.